Hey, what's going on, everybody? You're listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. I'm your host, Cliff, and today I have another special guest joining us. I have the Senior Director of Marketing at Epic Records, Dylan Brewer, joining us today. How are you doing today, Dylan?
Cliff, what up, man? Happy to be here. Thank you.
Good, good. I'm happy to have you a part of the show. So first, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come on the SANE Show today. So I really appreciate it and excited to have the conversation that we're going to have today.
Of course, man. It's going to be great.
Cool deal. So really quick, before I introduce the topics, I want to take a moment to shout out all the listeners in all 60 plus countries and everybody that follows us on social media. And if you're listening and you don't already follow us, be sure to check us out on Instagram and Twitter at SANE_show. That's SANE, SANE_show on Instagram and Twitter. And then you can find us on Facebook, SANE Show. Again, on Facebook, that's SANE Show. So today we're going to have a conversation about music marketing. And then following that conversation, we're going to have a discussion about the rise of boutique entertainment agencies. And then following that discussion, we're going to have an interview with you, Dylan, so that the listeners can learn more about you and all the fun things that you do and everything that goes along with that. Let's go ahead and hop right into it with our first topic, music marketing. So doing what you do, I thought this was a fitting topic. Then there were quite a few things that came to mind for me. One of the first things that came to mind for me was Coca-Cola and Maroon 5, how they teamed up years ago and did the 24 hours of music where Maroon 5 was in a room together literally all day, and they wrote a song from scratch. They recorded it in the studio, and then Coca-Cola, they recorded the whole thing too. Like, you can go on YouTube and watch the video. And Coca-Cola promoted the song and everything, and it was a part of that campaign. And obviously, in that push, Coca-Cola was also promoting their own products. So and I think the concept of tying music into marketing is a unique concept in itself anyway, because music is a universal language, and I mean, if you got a catchy song and you're pushing a product, it makes it all the more engaging and entertaining, obviously too. And we see it at events and all those kinds of things, and obviously it's easy to do. And like I said to you before, I think the question begs, who does it really benefit when we talk about in the conversation when we're talking about brands and artists and them coming together and marketing, doing a music marketing campaign of some sort. So just want to hand it off to you really quick to get your thoughts on this whole thing as far as music marketing, and especially you having an interest in experiential marketing when it comes to music. Just wanted to get your thought and share that with the listeners.
I could sort of touch on a few of those things. I mean, like, we're referencing the sort of like brand integration. Like, I sort of remember that activation with Maroon 5. It was like probably like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Which might have been around the moment where Maroon 5 sort of like stopped making as cool music as they were at the time. Like, around like 2012. I knew. So this probably was part of that sort of pivot in like their decision and just making more music that was whatever, more global and mainstream. I mean, obviously, like, this, again, like, if it was sort of, if this was a live stream moment, like, the technology or whatever, it could have been. I'm trying to put it in context of when it happens, right? When you look at it sort of objectively, there's not really any mutual investment deeper than just some sort of first in the industry. And I think that's still sort of a common thing now with brand integration, especially people who just don't really get the music industry, or vice versa, or get the art form. It's like Coke may have just done it because it was like the most ambitious music thing that a drink company has done, or like, it's really sort of just a flash in the pan,
Mm-hmm.
And there's not really any kind of like deeper dive into like, is there any connection between the band and like the integrity of the brand, right?
Right.
In that case, like, maybe it didn't matter, and that's not what it was meant to do. Ultimately, like, I find that fans actually get more involved, and it actually creates a deeper connection when there's something that bridges that gap between brand and band. In this case, it just looks like two just massive brands, even like Maroon 5 at this point becoming sort of like a more globally accessible group, just sort of trying to do this one thing and shit. Like it doesn't go really much deeper than this. I think this is pretty like vanilla, right? When it comes to integration. But like, I think there's been cool, like thoughtful brand integrations to music. I always think there could be more, like I think it comes in waves, like when based off of like where the attention span of where brands need to be. You know what I mean? Like obviously we're in another sort of phase of a mass sort of like 24-hour news cycle, if not less, right? You have TikTok, like brands are sort of involved in different ways and sort of have to navigate their story and have become much more of a voice themselves. Like brands on Twitter 3-4 years ago, like before you could never really have like a voice like that, and you had to do partnerships with Maroon 5 and whatever, that kind of felt stale and still separated. But now you have, what was the one? It was like it was the Super Bowl one where like the lights went out in the middle of the Super Bowl and then like
oh no.
I think it was like Oreo or something. It was like, I'm gonna just look it up because I got a computer. Super Bowl lights out, Oreo. Yeah, I don't remember. They just tweeted some shit like, "Oh, dunk in the dark." Like they just like interacted in real time, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is so innovative." But it was like the platform's been there for a while. I just think like eventually you have a few people that break the rules.
Yeah.
Like I know Wendy's was an early one. I feel like they like. You just had some people who took a risk, and then ultimately like it became a norm, right? So I think because of that, you can have more integrated campaigns that feel more human, right? Like another good example is like Vince Staples and Sprite. Like Vince Staples is ultimately known as someone who doesn't give a fuck and like is just on his own shit and like rants on Twitter and like people love him for it. So he had to like own that in doing the shit with Sprite, right? It was, I forget the commercial. It was funny though. It was like, it worked right into his brand, right into his voice. And ultimately, if you're a brand and you're working with an artist like that, you have to keep that voice and keep that connection. Maroon 5 thing is like no one really cares what Adam has to say ultimately. Like that's just part of the brand, like, whatever. So it's like it kind of works because it's sort of stale on both ends. But yeah, I mean, I think that stuff can still happen. Ultimately, now you have musicians and artists who are like creating their own brands and don't, if they're big enough, they don't need to do these partnerships, right? Like
much like Rihanna.
Everyone's got a drink company now, right? Like Post Malone's got wine, Travis Scott's got and seltzers, and that started from like the Puff days, and you know what I mean, like in Jay-Z. Being your own business is definitely like the trend, right? Like if you once you get to a certain point, you start your own record label, you start your own music festival, you start your own drink brand, you start your own whatever it is. I think if we're like, that's just mentioning, you sort of mentioned the Coke thing. I think like the brand integration thing is certainly, I think continues to be an interesting route, at least for bigger artists. I don't know how much, brands are necessarily doing for developing artists now in like a super meaningful way. That's not sort of like a bit dated. I think ultimately the voice of brands is always going to be a bit behind the voice of an artist. Usually the best ones are when like an artist brand or it comes from them, right? Or you just have the one-offs who really understand these folks. But usually it's to like hit a certain number of sales or something, and like that kind of quantitative measure is like you're not gonna get something that's super meaningful. You know what I mean? Or like that touches people in the same way.
I certainly agree. I was just thinking about how I cannot think of the country music artist's name, but I think it was Luke Bryan.
Yeah.
It was right when COVID, the pandemic hit, and like they were canceling concerts and everything, and these artists were doing a lot of things from home, and some of the sponsors were still wanting like, hey, okay, well you're not doing this tour, well hey, do something at home. And I just remember like one of and it may not have been Luke Bryan, but one of the country artists, big one too, had all this Bud Light in his kitchen, and he's sitting on a stool, with his guitar and playing music and singing. So,
well, Bud Light, that was a good one because when they were doing they had like the dive bar series, very cool idea. It wasn't necessarily to hit a mass of people. It wasn't like Amex doing massive arena. It was like, we're going to pick 100-person bars cat bars, and this is before COVID, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
throw John Mayer in a tour, like, or a few of them. Like I think they did one with Miley Cyrus. I think they threw massive artists in these, but it was like an extension of the lifestyle of Bud Light. And you see like Post Malone just went double down on it. Still has his own company, but has a massive partnership with them. It just like made sense. Like it's like
Right.
Post Malone embodies that whole thing. Like the people who drink Bud Light are ultimately who Post Malone is, like personality wise. So that's why it works better. You know what I mean? Because these artists have voices. They're not just these brands that people can't understand anymore.
All right, we're back. So now we're going to have a conversation about the rise of boutique entertainment agencies, and some of this will tie back to our previous discussion as it relates to music marketing, because there's been a lot of people parting ways with major labels and music talent agencies specifically. Well, agencies all around, but for this particular segment, music talent agencies. Obviously, there's been a lot of smaller labels, independent labels popping up all over the place. But I find that things have been most interesting with the independent agencies and marketing agencies or brand agencies that have popped up over the last few years. And I think a lot of it, again, does go back to first topic with music marketing, of seeing what a lot of these smaller agencies have been able to do for these artists. Like we talked about, gone are the days of the like old school endorsements and just propping up random artists. I guess going back to the Maroon 5 and Coca-Cola thing, like just finding someone because they're popular and doing something with them, where branded talent agencies are now stepping outside the box. So, I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do doing what you do. So definitely want to hear what you have to say to that.
Yeah, I think you're sort of referencing two sort of different things, right? Like, I think the label side, I can talk on that a bit. I mean, yeah, there's clearly there's growth in companies like DistroKid, Empire, AWOL, like United Masters, that Lander's another one. There's a number of them, right? That sort of started out as distribution companies and ultimately started adding services, but the main thing was that they would let artists sort of own their masters at the end of the day. I think all of those companies do that, I believe. Could be wrong, but that was sort of like people got fed up with how label deals were set up, and there was enough new technology that could be created and databases and certain tools that could be granted directly to the artists. And so the past really 15 years or so, it's like the overall education of that stuff directly with the artists has become much more transparent, right? The artists are understanding more, managers are understanding more, and it's not just like any other department in music. Like you didn't have to just go to a label and like to become well known, right? Like we all know that. That's like a classic story. So
Right.
I think if we're talking about those companies, yeah, I think there's a huge advantage for an indie artist to look at them. I think ultimately they're still sort of building that they're doing, and I think a lot of them are struggling to be like, okay, we have broken this artist. Like that's the case study. I think some people are trying to tell that story, but ultimately I think still you have artists who sign an album deal with them, get to a pretty good developing point, and then leave and go to a major. Because at that point, the majors probably still have more money to put behind you, and at least you're at 60 instead of 0. From my experience, like labels are usually best at that part, the 60 to 100, to like get something out of here. I think labels generally struggle in the 0 to 60 compared to some of these other companies, right?
I think of it like a car with certain cars. Right? I think about like some of these cars, these 4 cylinders, and they're all strapped with turbochargers now, and like have really awesome 0 to 60 times and get off the line fast. But then if you want to get that top speed,
You want to stay fast.
right, you got to get something bigger and more
Yeah.
powerful, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I'm looking at these smaller agencies and these labels, right? And so the way you described the labels, and I never really thought of it like that either. And because it's you really got my brain going now, because I'm even thinking about it not just in the music space, but even in the podcasting space. Because it's like, to be able to, how I'm thinking about it with the labels, right? You have to have something worth investing in, and being able, like, it's going to take a lot more to push the artist to
Yeah.
that next level.
I think ultimately, like, labels still get to reap the benefit of like their legacy and the sort of infrastructure that's been built for the past 60 to 70 years of, like, I mean, some labels are older than that. A global infrastructure, right? A international marketing department. Having Sony has ties in nearly every country you can think of. Same with UMG, same with Warner. So it's very hard to build that, right? Like, that is
Yeah.
like a global network that is part of just it's a corporate society. It's a corporation. It's just like a massive entity that's built its way over decades to get there. So clearly that is a huge advantage for a major. Same thing with radio. Radio, I think, matters less and less, but it still has a huge audience. And the relationship that labels have with programmers, and that's still very much built in. iHeartRadio is a massive corporation, just like UMG is, right? Like, ultimately, like, value in those larger partnerships. MTV, Vivo, like, all those things are big. Like, Spotify, same thing. Facebook, Twitter, like, all these companies have to kind of sleep in bed together. Facebook wants to let people post music on their platform, so they have to get licensing rights, and then they strike a deal with these labels, and then because they strike the deal, UMG goes, well, we want to include, you have to verify these number of artists. Like, there's all these things that come with just overall, like, corporate partnerships. I don't even know what I was talking about. Okay, let me reel it back. But no, I think those are the benefits, right? I think the things that are sort of that are more accessible are obviously the things that are happening digitally and socially, and I mean, even getting on TV, getting on the cover of a magazine, like, you can reach out to those editors directly, right? Like, that network doesn't mean that much. Even radio, you can too. Obviously, I think there's a bit more of a larger partnership again, like, with those entities, like a Hearst has with UMG, or like the major publication brands or whatever companies. So yeah, there's still those, like, larger sort of, like, leverage points. You know what I mean? They'll continue to be around. You know what I mean? And I think they'll continue to sign artists and stuff like that. But I think ultimately the structure will change. I think it's the narrative. It's ultimately, it's the same thing we were talking about before with brands having a voice. Like, a few people have to do it. A few people have to have the story, and then they'll have to adjust. Labels will have to sort of adjust the way things work, because ultimately the marketplace dictates. In this case, artists would dictate what the new norm is. I think that was, like, the first part of your question about sort of the labels and non-labels that artists are sort of working with, if I'm correct. I think the other thing you bring up is our agencies, which, from your question, I took a little bit differently, and is more of like, okay, what marketing agencies or creative agencies labels are partnering with, or artists. Am I right in that question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's certainly something to that as well. I still think in the music industry, there's, again, this is my experience, and I think it could be there, but I think ultimately there's a lot of agencies that are very creative, that do really, really solid creative work. And then there's other agencies that are very good at, like, marketing strategy. And there's, like, the big ones that we sort of know that work with brands and make tons of money, like the Drogas and like the big ones that you see, like Ad Age, right? And those are still sort of the verticals in which I think the label world sort of tries to navigate and work with. I've worked with both sides. I still think that there's a disconnect where there's not, like, a middle ground of a agency that truly understands or is optimizing on, like, the full connection of, like, a creative side and a marketing side that works seamlessly. I think a lot of agencies will say they do, but ultimately there's still that separation. The same way there's a separation between the people who work at brands and the people who create music, right? There's a difference in understanding the process and the storytelling of it, with people who work at a large ad agency. I do think there are people who are coming up, and it's become more sort of decentralized in that sense, where it's like there are teams outside of what the label provides that certain artists can work with. I mean, right now it's like it's either coming from the artist or they have a small team around them. The agency ultimately is just like who are the homies around you who shoot content and edit it, right? Like that's your agency. Let's just get you someone who you fuck with, who you put on retainer, and they they follow you everywhere, they shoot everything, they edit the content, and they try on error a bunch of stuff, right? That's what an agency needs to do right now. Period. Like if you are a music agency, you have a network of videographers and photographers and editors and essentially content creators who like can understand the agency goes, I have this person who I think would be great because they would understand the voice of your artist. Great. And then they hang out, they see if they vibe, and then they just start shooting stuff, and then you trial and error it, and you come up with some sort of plan, whether that comes from the label or the agency, of like, okay, here's our distribution pyramid, right? We're going to do 15 pieces of content for TikTok a month. We're going to do 10 for Instagram. We're going to do 30 for Instagram story. Then you have more of a strategy element of the relationship. I ultimately think there's still an opportunity for an agency or an independent partner for indie artists or for label artists to exist. I think what happens is, generally speaking, labels don't invest enough in creative. It's not their strength. I think everyone would agree with me on that. And it just goes to show about how the departments are set up. Also, you have labels who sign hundreds of artists, and so you can only do so many things with each artist. You have to manage a ton of artists. So everyone's sort of wiped out because they're sort of just overseeing and managing what artists are doing and just sharing information and making sure people know this and this and that and that. Like, there isn't, some labels have it, but like a focus group of like an incubator that's set up, and it's like 5 to 10 artists, and the only artists that this incubator gets to work on for a full year. I feel like Interscope has that. I feel like there's some others. I should know more of this, but I don't. But like ultimately that's a place that can breed a bit more success, right? Because it's creative driven. It's coming from a place that understands sort of marketing, so to speak, or if it's a marketing person at the label. And then you have that focus and consistency on development. Right now, the artist agencies are whoever's shooting content for them, period. And then if someone else, whether it's the artist manager or the artist or their product manager, can go, hey, I think you should cut it down like this. We should build your profile on TikTok like this. We should focus on Twitter because of this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's still the benefit. I still, as a marketer, if I need to find a content creator or someone to follow an artist around, there's not like one company that I really know of that does that well. I sort of I have to scour Instagram or like go into my network of videographers, right? You sort of still have to ask around. I think that there's an opportunity for a company to be like, I have a network of dope videographers and editors, and you can come to me and tell me who the artist is, and I can go, these 3 people will be great and reasonable because it's a developing artist. I think that's not quite there yet. I think people are trying, to do it. So that's my take on agencies.
Got you. Thank you for that. All right, we're back now for the interview. So Dylan, I'm going to ask you a few questions so that we can learn a little bit more about you, the things that you do, and all the fun things that go along with that. So I'm going to go ahead and fire off with this first question. You're in marketing at Epic Records. You work with artists too. How much influence does marketing have on the content being produced, and where's the line drawn?
I don't even think they're separate entities. I think it's the exact same thing. Marketing is storytelling, and the form of storytelling is through content. So you could say content is the channel or the medium of the story. They sort of go they go fully hand in hand. Ultimately, we're just sort of like using verbiage that's like, well, content's this, content's king. Like I think marketing obviously encompasses more than that, in the sense of marketing could be like, I have the intuition to know that this artist should partner with this brand. Like that could be considered brand marketing. So I think marketing is like a bigger umbrella of just understanding who the artist is and how and where to capture an audience, whereas content is ultimately what gets to the audience. Marketing is sort of like the engine behind what gets produced, and that's content, if that makes sense. It's a means to an end sort of thing. But ultimately, like, content is how we discover information. Like, that's what we're calling it now. It's not the newspaper. Everything's just content, right? Like it's news. It's our feeds. It's anything that we see every day is content. But ultimately they go fully hand in hand. I don't think they're necessarily like two separate things.
That was different from what I was expecting. So thank you for that. That definitely got me thinking about some things for sure. So my next question to you, brands teaming up with music artists has been a trend for a while now. And obviously we've discussed this a little bit too. What is it really about? Brands trying to look cool and trendy, or push out a message about their products that resonate with consumers?
I think it's gotten better, right? Like I think like ultimately when brands were like, we realized that, I mean, you can go back to when music became of like the most popular form of culture. You know what I mean? Like when culture was music, brands were trying to take advantage of that. I can't give specific examples. I have to imagine the shit goes back to like the 50s and 60s. It was like it depended on the medium too. It was like what kind of worked and what didn't, and like MTV became like made music videos, and then there was product placement, right? And it was new and fresh at the time, so it was kind of dope, like, because it was new. And then ultimately it was like people were like, this is done too much, or people are stretching out. It's just like, okay, this is overdone, it's saturated, now you have to innovate, right? And that's every sort of phase of brand integration with artists. I think I don't know, I'm not an expert on what brands are trying to do necessarily now in any space. I mean, like I said before, I think they're ultimately trying to have the voice of a certain lifestyle, and I think artists can be a conduit to that or help continue to drive that. So I think it's ultimately going in a better place, but I don't see enough like examples of that today, really. You know what I mean? So I think both of those things exist. I think like brands are having the voice and trying to engage in meaningful topics and stuff. Ultimately, that's kind of like that kind of is falls to the wayside, because it's like it's all kind of set up. Like we can smell this shit. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
if it's like brands we're gonna curate a roundtable for 7 famous female artists, and they're going to talk about what it means to be a someone who's had to fight more in the industry to get there. And it's like, nothing against what that's about, but it kind of is just like they're doing it because of what's already happening, like because of the activism, whatever, like because of the conversation. It feels contrived. I think there's a good intention, but ultimately it's a contrived thing. So there's brands that probably do that better than others, but it's the same thing as before. A brand can feel contrived if it's trying to force itself into a music video, right? A brand feels contrived if it's trying to force itself into a conversation that is like socially lit right now, you know what I mean? Or like
Right.
politically lit, or like whatever. So I think mostly most brands are trying to do it because they need to hit a certain number of selling their products. But I'm not, I think it goes both ways. I think there's always more brands that can take risks, and it doesn't feel like right now a lot of brands are taking risks.
Yeah, for sure. My next question to you, you said that you love offering insight and addressing misconceptions regarding the music industry. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you have addressed regarding the music industry?
This is like hot spot, like let's hot button question. Let's go. Like this. I mean, listen, man, it's like I think that ultimately the artist again, this is what I said before. It's like over time, artists are understanding the business more, and they have to, and that comes down from like what their contract looks like to how they have to have a certain personality on social media and like market themselves to like what is the actual relationship with their label. They need like I am like my role is to be as transparent as possible with the reality of the situation with an artist and their manager. Maybe just their management. Again, it depends on who I'm talking to. I'm also like smart. I'm not trying to go to an artist and like bum them out, right? It's like there is a reality of when you get signed to a label and you have no following and you have no songs out and you don't really have much, you're starting from ground zero, you're not going to be the highest priority of the label, right? Period. Like that's most people understand that. Like I said, labels may have 200 artists and they have the top 10 artists making 80% of their money, right? So it's like they got to focus on those. And now those artists are putting out music way more often than they did before. The cycle is not 3 years anymore. It's 6 months. So ultimately the developing artists that they're signing are getting pushed down. And I think a lot of artists assume that when they sign to a label, something's going to happen. And that's just not straight up not true, right? It's like you get a check and most artists decide to just spend that check very fast and then go, well, where's more money? You know, it's like a lot of artists sign deals and don't have the leverage in their deal. The record label has the leverage in the deal. So when artists are like, how do I get labels to notice me? And like they keep trying to hit up A&Rs and they try to keep hitting up people who work at labels. Like you don't have the leverage. You want to be sexy. Like you want to be you don't want to be like, you want to be sought after. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to have to be like hitting on girls in the bar every night. Like you want to come in confident as fuck and have a girl be like, oh, hey, what's good? Like that's what you want. And and artists, I think they still have the mindset that like a label's going to solve all their problems because they can cut you a fat check. But ultimately, there's circumstances that I don't necessarily blame labels for. I think it's just like a historic infrastructure issue. But it's still like, let's throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. And that's, again, goes to my last conversation about 0 to 60, 60 to 100. You know what I mean? Is artists can do and need to do more on their own to garner not only the fan base, but the leverage of labels wanting to work with them. So I think that's a big fallacy. And ultimately, like when you're a small artist, my goal is to find the most passionate people in the label who I know will love this artist because of the genre, because of their personality, whatever it is, and go, here's your team of champions. You have 4 people. There's 150 people that work at the label. You get 4. That's what we're working with right now. And we have to get these motherfuckers excited, period. I don't care if it's an intern. Like the intern will do more than the head of radio in your first to second year of your development, period. It's about encouraging and empowering these people to do more shit. When you build a team like that, you're ultimately going to be more effective. So I think that's those are just a few things that I try to communicate with artists and managers. And other things, it's like the artists can feel like, and this is in their contract, so it's not even something that they don't, it's like they feel like they could blow a lot of money early, or they could do certain things, or like, let's just move budget here, or we'll spend money here, and it's like, I have to look out for the artist. This is the artist money. It's the artist money because a lot of the shit's going to be recouped. So once you become big and you get a hit, you think you'll get a lot of money, but then the label's going to recoup a lot of that shit back. And you're going to go, wait, I thought I had more money than this. Well, it's because they're recouping all the fucking other marketing costs that were in your contract because you wanted to do that $100,000 music video. I try to like steer the conversation and like, I don't just give you budget. I don't want that to be the thing. It's like, how much money do we have? It's like, if I'm talking to an artist manager, I'll be like, dude, let's have a real conversation about how much money you think should be spent on this thing. Let's look at how important content is. and you want to do one music video for $100,000. You want to do 3 billboards in LA that cost you $20K that go away after 2 weeks. Cool. You want to post that on Instagram and you want to look cool in front of your friends. I totally get it. We can do that. Now what? These are the conversations I have to have. This isn't just our money. It is also your money. And I've worked with artists who, again, I go back to the storytelling and the strengths and the self-awareness. I've seen artists who go and we throw stupid money at radio, stupid money on features, stupid money on fucking music videos. And all of a sudden, we spent $2 million on this artist, and it's been 2 years. And we finally found who this artist is. We're like, he's a R&B superstar. Like, we're pushing him pop the whole time. Like, you can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, we can't wait 2 years into the process to be like, oh, now we know who you are. Great. Well, guess what? You're $2 million in the hole, and now you're on the top shelf. So now the label's only going to give you one more shot, period. And guess what? It's probably going to be a fucking radio, because that's one of the lowest hanging fruit things that they can throw money at, that they know gives you direct results back. You feel me? So it's right. Like, I just touched on 10 different things, but that's like, I'm trying to get to that point. That's just on a budget thing, bro. That's just like on money. There's a lot of other shit that people think people should be working for them. I wish it was different. But part of my job is I'm a cheerleader, bro. I'm on the streets, dude. I'm on the streets being like, someone care about this artist. Like, I have to do that. That's the reality. We're in a people business. At the end of the day, the head of urban radio is not going to give a fuck about a TikTok pop artist. It doesn't matter. We can't lie and be like, well, you can't be biased about your artist. It's like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, it's music. Of course we're biased. Like, if we love the song more, we're going to work it harder, period. But it's about having the people. There's 150 people at the label. I guarantee you can find 5 of them who love TikTok, who love K-pop, who love, like, find them, and that's your core team. And then maybe when we get to a certain level, we start bringing those other people in. Or we show that there's growth in certain things, so that the CEO or whatever goes, we need this. It's all chess playing at that point. But that's the reality of the structure, straight up. And that's at most labels. Some labels may just throw you X number of dollars and say, here you go, do something with this. And then if you don't do anything with it, then it's like you're dropped, right? Also fucked up. But that's the reality of some labels do that. Other labels do this. But it's all the same, right? If you're a developing artist, you got to find a small team of people to work with. So, bro, obviously I'm triggered now. but that's why I do it. You feel me? That's why I'm still on the label side, because like I need to be able to bring the artists and their managers into the cave, and here's some people who will help you get through. Here's a little light. Let's walk through this shit together. That's the reality. It's reality, you know. So
well, you actually
next episode.
Well, you actually answered the last question in that one too. So,
well, what's the question?
It was a question about, you know, why you keep going. So,
I think another thing is, like, I just want to do cool shit with artists, right? That's just like my personal thing. Like, I just want to do dope shit with artists. That's it. Like that, like. The other marketing things and get your songs in the malls and gyms and like cool. That's like, we can, again, it's like the billboard. We can do that. These are plug and play things. It's not that exciting to me, right? Like, there's check boxes. We have a toolbox. Labels have a bunch of tools that we can go, here are all the things that we can just do with X number of dollars. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to challenge ourselves. It's a opportunity for people in the label business to be innovative, because very few people are. 5% of the people get it. 95% of the people don't. Straight up. I think that's one of the reasons I do it a lot, you know, because I sort of get to see shit on the inside, right? That's super important. At the end of the day, man, labels are still fucking here. They're not going nowhere. They still have all the money. I get to see the shit on the inside, and I get to understand some of the ways money moves and why people care about this and where labels are focused on. And then I can understand that shit and educate. You know what I mean?
Well, hey, this was a very insightful episode, and I really, again, really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come on and
Hmm.
share all of that great stuff. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was definitely exciting and definitely a lot of takeaways for me. So thank you again, Dylan, for taking and coming on the SANE Show today.
Anytime, Cliff. Appreciate it. I'm
Yeah,
all fired.
thank you.
About to go for a run. I'm about to do 20 miles, my guy.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, definitely run some for me. So thank you again, Dylan, and thank you again, listeners, for continuing to listen and continuing to like, share, and subscribe. And again, you are listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. And until next time, we're out.